Ladies and gentlemen, we would like to commence the press conference. Today's guest is Secretary General Mathias Cormann of OECD. OECD issues the survey report once every 2 years of member countries, and they compile in a report. Today, they are going to launch the 2026 OECD Economic Survey of Japan. As you know, very briefly, I will introduce him. Senator Cormann is from Belgium. In 1996, he emigrated to Australia, so he has the both background of Europe and Indo-Pacific. He served in the Senate of Commonwealth Government, Australia, and he was the budget minister. And then in 2021, in June, he became the 6th Secretary General of OECD. He had 2 appearances at our club in 2021 and 2024. This is his 3rd appearance. Thank you very much for sharing your precious time despite your very tight schedule. This conference will be conducted with simultaneous interpretation in English and Japanese. After the presentation by Secretary General, we will have a question and answer session. We will have the presence of Mr. Douglas Sutherland, who is the head of division, Country Studies Branch 3 Economic Department, as well as Ms. Muge McGowan, Deputy Head, Country Studies Branch 3 Economic Department, OECD. Sorry, belatedly, I will introduce myself. I am Shigesaburo OKUYAMA, a commentator of NIKKEI, who is on the planning committee of JPC. Interpreters are NAGAI and TOMINAGA of Simul International. Senator Cormann, floor is yours.
Well, good morning, everyone. Welcome and thank you for joining us today for the launch of the 2026 Economic Survey of Japan. Japan's economy grew by 1.2% in 2025, which was a resilient performance against the headwinds of higher tariffs and global trade uncertainty. But conditions have further shifted. The escalation of the Middle East conflict has pushed energy prices higher and weighed on business and consumer confidence worldwide. And Japan, which imports around 90% of its crude oil, is directly exposed. Since 2019, as you can see on this graph, Japan's GDP growth has trailed both the OECD average and Japan's G7 peers. In fact, GDP per capita also remains below the G7 average. That is the context in which this survey is presented, and it is the starting point for the recommendations we set out before you today. This survey sets out evidence-based policy recommendations for Japan to revitalize growth and build resilience to future shocks. After 3 decades of near zero inflation, the economy has made a positive transition towards a more balanced, higher inflation equilibrium. Inflation rose above the central bank's 2% target between April 22 and December 2025, but this March inflation stood at 1.5%. But the surge in energy prices as a result of the conflict in the Middle East is expected to push inflation back up in the second quarter, even with the gasoline price cap introduced in response. This also places a new cost burden on fiscal policy, which is a reminder that energy dependence is not only an economic vulnerability, but also a fiscal vulnerability. We project GDP growth to ease from 1.2% last year to 0.7% this year and 0.9% next year. Domestic demand will be the main driver of growth. Consumer price inflation is projected at 2% this year and 1.9% next year. And with inflation near the target and solid nominal wage growth, monetary policy normalization, which began with an interest rate increase in March 24, should continue at a gradual pace. We project the policy rate to rise from the current 0.75% to 2% at the end of next year. The gross public debt to GDP ratio is set to decline, but remain high. We highlight 4 policy priorities to strengthen the resilience and growth of the economy. First, strengthening fiscal sustainability. Japan's gross public debt is the highest among OECD countries as a share of GDP, at 206% of GDP in 2024. Sovereign bond yields have been rising in part due to higher policy rates. Strong fiscal discipline is needed to lower debt servicing costs, ensure investor confidence, and put the gross public debt to GDP ratio on a firm downward trend. Developing a clear and credible medium-term fiscal plan with specific spending and tax measures is very important to achieve and maintain a primary fiscal surplus. As Japan's investor base must broaden and long-term rates continue to rise, this is not an abstract fiscal objective, it is a prerequisite for maintaining market confidence. The supplementary budgets have been used every year since 2000 to allow for higher net spending relative to the initial budget. They have been especially significant in the last 6 fiscal years, including, of course, as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. But looking ahead, the use of supplementary budgets should be limited to large economic shocks with a clear, transparent definition of the circumstances in which they apply. Demographic pressures are significant, with the old age dependency ratio estimated to increase further. This year, there are 56 adults aged 65 and over for every 100 adults of working age in Japan, the highest value for this ratio among OECD countries. In 2060, that number will have increased even further to 79 for every 100. That is, the number of adults aged 65 and over is expected to be equivalent to more than 3/4 of Japan's working age population by then. As we live longer, and we live longer healthier, and Japan is fortunate enough to have one of the highest life expectancies in the world, extending work careers will be key to keep Japan's pension system sustainable without cutting retirement incomes or requiring higher social contributions. Japan has, in fact, the second highest life expectancy in the OECD at 84 years of age compared to 81 for the average OECD country. Yet under current policies, young people entering the labour market today are expected to retire earlier than in the average OECD country and will therefore spend longer in retirement than in any other OECD country. That combination of the world's second longest lives and a retirement age below the OECD average is fiscally unsustainable. Increasing the pension eligibility age by linking it to rising life expectancy would strengthen work incentives and ensure the financial sustainability of the pension system. Optimizing revenues by gradually increasing consumption taxes can contribute to building fiscal buffers. Japan's standard value-added tax rate is 10% compared to the OECD average of 19%. Second, boosting productivity growth. Achieving higher productivity is key to address demographic pressures and strengthen income growth. The average Japanese worker produced 24% less output per hour worked in 2024 than the average worker in the OECD. Streamlining administrative proceedings for registering and starting a firm would increase business dynamism and spur productivity gains. Japan has significant scope to reduce administrative and regulatory burdens for business. We estimate these burdens to be the second highest among OECD countries based on our product market regulation indicators. So there is genuine scope for improvement. Reforms can help attract inward foreign direct investment. Japan's inward foreign direct investment is the lowest across OECD countries at 5% of GDP compared to 53% for the OECD on average. The regulatory framework for foreign direct investment is not particularly restrictive relative to the OECD average, but integration into local business ecosystems can be challenging due to complex processes and language barriers. Enhancing the role of one-stop shops for inward foreign direct investment with formal powers to better coordinate with licensing, registration, and compliance authorities could help reduce administrative burdens for foreign investors. Strong skills, especially technical skills, are the foundation for unlocking opportunities from AI and digitalization. However, the share of higher education graduates in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics at 20% among all graduates is below the OECD average of 24%. The corresponding share for women is just 3.6%, the lowest in the OECD and less than half the OECD average of 8%. And that is despite Japanese 15-year-old students scoring the highest in science and mathematics across the OECD. Something is happening between secondary school and the labor market that is destroying the clearly available pipeline, particularly for women. That gap represents both a waste of talent and a missed productivity dividend for Japan that could be driving stronger, sustained growth. Boosting the number of higher education students in these disciplines will require building active interest in scientific professions, starting from primary and secondary education. Key enabling factors include teaching approaches that highlight the relevance of science and mathematics to everyday life, appropriate teacher training, and targeted mentoring, especially for female students. Business dynamism can also be strengthened. Firm entry and exit rates were around 4% in 2024, compared to around 10% in the United States. Financial support for small and medium-sized enterprises remains significant, with publicly guaranteed loans at 5.3% of GDP and direct loans at 4.2% of GDP in 2024, though levels are now lower than during the pandemic years. But better targeting this support is required to encourage young and innovative firms to grow and unproductive firms to exit the market. Lowering the rate at which loans are publicly guaranteed from the current 80% would encourage banks to strengthen their level of risk assessment. Third, tackling labor shortages. Making regular job contracts a more attractive and common employment option can lower precarious work, increase pay, improve job quality, and strengthen worker productivity. Boosting the flexibility of regular employment contracts could especially benefit older and young workers and women for whom the share of non-regular contracts is relatively high. Expanding high-quality adult learning programs will be an important tool to enhance in-demand skills, including digital skills, and help address labor shortages. Parts of these programs should be tailored towards older workers and workers on non-standard contracts, such as part-time workers, who are much less likely to participate in training. Among 55 to 65-year-olds, 20% participated in adult learning in 2023 in Japan, compared to 26% for the OECD average. Similarly, for workers on part-time contracts, only 20% participated in adult learning in Japan, compared to 40% in the OECD. So that is half in Japan compared to the OECD average. And that is when the need to keep people skilled and employed for longer is more acute in Japan than it is elsewhere. Policies to attract and integrate foreign workers should be continued. The number of foreign workers has risen significantly from about 686,000 people in 2011 to around 2.5 million in 2025. Still, the share of the foreign-born population in Japan at 2.7% is well below that in most other OECD countries. Recent reforms establishing new pathways for immigrants are welcome, but better guidance for foreign applicants in navigating the complexity of employment schemes will be important. Expertise and resources at the local level should be boosted to facilitate effective implementation of integration policies. Fourth, reducing greenhouse gas emissions. Ambitious reforms and accelerated implementation are needed to meet the legislated commitment to net zero emissions by 2050. Last year's Green Transformation 2040 vision has been a very important initiative setting out how decarbonisation is an opportunity to revive long-term growth, position Japan as a leader in low emissions technologies and strengthen energy security. Effective design of policies will be important to ensure that the government's vision is delivering efficient outcomes and value for money. Reducing reliance on fossil fuels would also improve energy security, with around 90%, as I mentioned earlier, of Japan's crude oil imported from the Middle East. The average effective carbon rate is lower than the OECD average here in Japan. Japan is planning to introduce carbon pricing later this decade in conjunction with upfront industrial subsidies for investment. These planned carbon taxes will need to be sufficient to incentivize emissions reduction, and swiftly announce the details of the carbon pricing policy would help reduce uncertainty and hence boost the level of investment by giving investors greater certainty. Upfront investment support should be allocated through competitive and transparent selection processes to maximize additional investment and to avoid subsidizing projects that would have proceeded without financial support in any event. The share of renewables in electricity generation rose to 24% in 2024, up from 9% in 2010, though it remains below the OECD average of 34%. Continuing efforts to increase the contribution of renewables should be stepped up. Streamlining permitting processes, for example, by centralizing procedures that span multiple administrative agencies, could boost the use of renewable energy sources, and enhancing the electricity grid would also help. In conclusion, Japan's economy has shown great resilience in recent years, with output expanding at a moderate pace, but resilience is of course not the same as momentum. And the external environment, higher energy prices, trade fragmentation, geopolitical uncertainty, means the window for structural reform is now, not later. To strengthen growth and manage the pressures of an aging population and rising debt servicing costs, our survey identifies 4 interconnected priorities: restoring fiscal sustainability through a credible medium-term plan, pension reform linked to life expectancy and gradually increasing consumption tax revenues, boosting productivity by streamlining business regulation, attracting more foreign direct investment and closing the STEM skills gap, particularly for women, tackling labour shortages by reducing labour market dualism, expanding adult learning and better integrating female, older and foreign workers, and accelerating the green transition by streamlining permitting, swiftly announcing the details of the forthcoming carbon pricing mechanism, and ensuring the green energy investment program delivers value for money. This survey makes the case that the conditions for stronger, more resilient growth in Japan are there and can be achieved. Stronger growth and higher incomes and living standards can be achieved. The recommendations are practical, evidence-based and grounded in what peer economies have demonstrated is possible, and we very much look forward to our continued work in partnership with Japan to help bring them to fruition. Thank you very much for the opportunity to present this to you.
Secretary General Cormann, thank you very much. Now we will accept the questions. But before that, from the moderator, I would like to ask one question. using the prerogative of the moderator. There was some impressive data shown in the presentation. Japanese public debt to GDP ratio is 206%, and it is the highest level in OECD countries. And the aged population, the proportion of aged people in the population is second only after Korea. And there was a graph comparing the value-added taxes. Current tax rate is 10%. It is the lowest rate amongst the OECD countries. So one can draw policy from these data. In Japan, there is a discussion about consumption tax reduction regarding food items. So, in the report, based upon the report this time, what is the recommended policy in this regard?
Thank you very much for that question. I mean, at the OECD, we have a very long-standing view on consumption taxes generally, and also here in Japan, which reflects a clear principle, and that is that broad-based, well-designed consumption taxes are among the least distortionary ways to generate the stable revenues that Japan needs to meet its fiscal requirements. I mean, without increasing the overall tax burden, I think Japan could improve its tax mix, making its tax mix more growth-friendly and having a larger proportion of Japan's tax rise through consumption taxes would, in fact, facilitate stronger growth outcomes and hence also facilitate stronger revenues without increasing the overall tax burden. Now, as I mentioned in my presentation, I mean, Japan's consumption tax at 10% it remains the lowest in the OECD. It's less than half it's about half, just over half the 19% average across member countries. And, we do stand by our advice that there is a case for a gradual increase over time. Now, we fully understand, of course, the pressures that rising food prices place on households, particularly those with lower incomes. But a zero rate on food, we would suggest, is a rather blunt and costly response. I mean, it erodes the revenue base that Japan needs, and it actually disproportionately benefits higher income households who spend more in absolute terms. We would suggest, and this is consistent advice, I don't think anybody will be taken by surprise by this. I mean, I would have provided the same answer to this question at any time over the last several years. I mean, the better approach is to provide well-targeted fiscal support to low-income households that actually need that support, protecting people effectively and at a lower cost to the budget, preserving the fiscal sustainability that comes with the revenue, the additional revenue that can be generated by a higher consumption tax rate. So that would be, broad, have the broadest possible base, don't have exemptions that are hard to unwind, but make sure it's part of a reform of the overall tax mix that makes the overall tax mix more growth friendly, so that on the back of stronger growth you are able to generate additional revenues without increasing the overall tax burden. That is the OECD's consistent advice on that point.
ありがとうございます。では会場で質問のある。
Thank you very much. If you have a question, please raise your hand in person.
Please identify yourself by identifying yourself and organization and to whom your question is addressed. The online participants, please use the Q&A box on Zoom screen. I will read it on your behalf. Secretary General will have to leave to the next appointment, so he has to leave absolutely at 11:45. I hope you will cooperate with that. Yes, the person in the front row in the hall. I have a question to Secretary General. Ito Nakai is my name. I have two questions. The first one, in your presentation, you talked about the productivity increase in Japan and M&A. Is it effective in Japan? What is your opinion? M&A effective for Japanese productivity? Japanese working labor has... So is it good enough with increasing women and increasing productivity? What is the relevant involvement of foreign workers? 2.5 million foreign workers. To what extent do you think that we have to increase foreign workers? These are the questions.
So it is certainly true that part of the productivity story in Japan and the comparatively lower productivity comes from the fact that you have a shrinking working age population, and that is a drag on participation and growth. But you've also got an investment gap, like where over the last 25 years there has been insufficient capital investment to help optimize labor productivity. And at a time when you have, the demographic trend that you have, you really, that is a time when you really do need to optimize your investment in making sure that you really draw out everything you can out of the available human capital that is there. There is also when you have a shrinking working age population, you need to make sure that you use all of the available talent. And while female workforce participation, superficially appears quite high in Japan, the employment is, mostly in. The employment of female workers is not as optimum as it could be in the right high-quality jobs and through proper skills, through a proper approach on skills development, and it certainly could be upgraded. Japan will need to make the best possible use of female workers, young workers, and older workers, keeping workers in the workforce for longer with a better commitment to lifelong learning. I think some of the statistics that I talked through there point to rates of skills development and adult learning in Japan that are below the OECD average at a time when you actually need it even more than other countries. And, generally, I think there needs to be more investment across SMEs, as I've mentioned, in technology and innovation. In terms of migrant workers, there has been a trend towards more use of migrant workers in Japan already. But it's still at very low levels. And I suspect that in the years to come, you will need to reflect on how you can attract more people into the labor market in Japan to make up some of the gap that comes from a shrinking working age population. There's various other bits. Making sure that there are proper competitive tensions in the domestic market by making sure that the entry and exit of firms, that innovative, more productive firms, are actually able to compete on a level playing field, that incumbent firms that are not as productive are not inappropriately protected through government subsidies by being essentially allowing them to remain comparatively unproductive and making it harder for other firms to compete with them. I think that there's a range of things that Japan can do on that front. I might just ask whether Doug wants to add something here.
Yes, thank you. I think I would just compliment the Secretary General in respect to the female labour force participation, and I think this is where we talk about the dual labour market. So although they're, in comparison with many of the other countries in the OECD, female labour force participation is actually pretty high. It's often in part-time works or non-regular contracts, and that limits their ability to be as productive as they can. And this is in some of the ways that why we also support some of the work style reform agenda of making things like equal pay for equal work. And that's one way to really push making sure that you get the best out of all of your labour force. Maybe just to compliment also on the immigration workers, we do see, personally I've been coming to Japan for over 25 years and I've seen that the service or the customer facing side has moved from largely Japanese to a mix of nationalities. What we're recommending is having a look at other systems such as Australia, such as Canada, where they're very careful in trying to think what skills, what kind of workers do we need, and trying to match that flow as closely as possible. I'll leave that there.
There is a question online from Bloomberg, two reporters of Bloomberg reporters. They are overlapping questions. Yokoyama Erika-san and Terukina Akemi-san, these are the two people. So Akemi Terukina-san's question I will take up, and it is posed in English, so I will read it.
Terukina with Bloomberg. The report expects the Bank of Japan's policy rate to reach 2% by the end of 2027. That's more hawkish than projections from other institutions, including the IMF, which expects around 1.5%. The median estimate among economists surveyed by Bloomberg in April was also 1.5%. Could you elaborate on thinking behind your policy rate projection?
Okay, thank you very much. Essentially, the monetary policy rate, we are actually quite confident that Japan has turned the corner, so that price inflation is going to stabilize around the target rate of the Bank of Japan. We're also, perhaps some of the differences lies in our estimates of what the potential growth rate of the Japan economy is, and so that we're seeing that the output gap is closing, and that will give the basis for the policy rate to keep on moving upwards. Against that, there's also other pressures. We've mentioned that some of the recent declines in prices have been more administrative, and that the underlying momentum, we've got to be careful. So on the upside, we're also thinking that there is a stronger case for monetary policy to rise. I don't know if Mugi wants to add any more. No.
追加で、横山エリカさんから、
From Yokoyama Erika, BOJ, is it behind the curve? Can you comment on that, whether BOJ is behind the curve?
Well, look, the short answer is no. The longer answer is, the various, external shocks, trade uncertainty, Middle East energy disruption, justify a gradual data-driven approach and to be cautious. And I think that's been the Bank of Japan's strategy since March 2024. So we, in our assessment, we don't think that the Bank of Japan is critically behind the curve. Inflation expectations are anchored near target. The output gap is positive, and wage dynamics are strengthening. So, as we see it, the pace of normalization should accelerate as the economy's new equilibrium becomes clearer, and that prolonged ultra low rates, of course, carry their own risks, like distorted resource allocation, fiscal moral hazard, and reduced room to maneuver in the context of any future downturns. And certainly, the Bank of Japan communication on its balance sheet reduction path, is important. And as the largest Japan government bondholder, its exit from quantitative easing is directly connected to fiscal sustainability and sovereign risk perceptions. But these are challenging times, and I think that the Bank of Japan is navigating this in a very cautious and appropriate way, and continuing to adjust, its judgments based on the data that comes through, and that's as it should be.
The person in the front row, please.
I'm Leiko Sakurada from Jiji Press, and I have a question to Mr. Cormann. This is not, you repeatedly recommended to raise the consumption tax to Japan, but the real wages are unchanged since 30 years ago. So regarding this situation, what percentage is appropriate, do you think, to Japan?
Well, look, we're not recommending an increase in the overall tax burden, but if in the end, you got to look at your tax mix, and the truth is that a consumption tax is one of the least distortionary, most economically efficient revenue sources, which arguably in Japan is underutilized, to lessen pressure on other revenue sources. And so, I'm going to invite Doug to sort of see whether he wants to talk. We're talking about a gradual increase. Now, in terms of, the wage that matters to households is the take-home wage, after tax. If the way to increase that over time is by boosting productivity and by boosting growth, sustainably boosting growth, and a more growth-friendly tax system can help boost growth and productivity, also to the extent that it facilitates additional participation and additional productivity and additional investment. It will be a driver of higher incomes and higher living standards. But I understand that these conversations can be politically challenging, but by the same token, you got to look where the opportunities are to put yourself in a better position, where you balance your fiscal requirements with your economic growth aspirations and your aspirations in terms of living standards. And there's a reason why real wages haven't been going up substantially, and that is because productivity growth and labor productivity in Japan is relatively low. And you're going to have to find a way to bring it up. Doug?
I don't have really much to complement that, but I would say the Secretary General has already mentioned how zero-weighted VAT is actually pretty unprogressive or regressive in the way that the benefits are formed. And that's also when you're thinking about the effect of adjusting the tax mix. It allows, or it potentially can allow, companies to invest more, which can raise labour productivity, and that again then spills through to workers. So we would not be saying that you're going to make a large discrete raise in the product in the value add or the consumption tax rate at any time now. But it's also building it into expectations that firms will know that they'll be facing different tax mixes, and that will hopefully allow more investment to come forward, and that will then feed through into, let's say, real wages rising, because it's going to be linked with that productivity gains.
The highest income earners benefit from a 0% consumption tax or low consumption tax the same way as a low income earner. And there's a better way to have more differentiated support going to low-income earners, but still protect the revenue base you need as a government, in a way that is more growth-friendly. That's really what we're saying.
じゃあ通路から2番目の方。
The person in the second row.
I'm Kenji Kawase from Nikkei. I wish to ask about the external environment of the Japanese economy, namely, since we're so close to China. Would you please sort of elaborate on the state and the prospect of Chinese economy going forward? And then given the summit meeting coming up between President Xi Jinping and Trump, some of the things that are discussed, probably discussed, will be on the economic policies aspect, tariffs. And also the second part of my question is on the subsidies of Chinese government, which OECD has been making reports, like on the photovoltaic solar panel industry this year, and then you have the EV industry report last year. Would you please comment on the government subsidies, the distortion effect or the effect on the industrial policy, and also on the exports, which affects the rest of the world? Thank you.
Thank you very much for that question. Well-functioning global markets, keeping markets open, a rules-based trading system in good working order, are all important to optimize the global economic growth outlook. They're all important for export-oriented nations, including a nation like Japan. And there are issues in the way the global trading arrangements are currently operating or not operating, and some of these vulnerabilities have been exposed in recent years through various crises. There are issues around market distorting practices, unfair market practices, the use of industrial subsidies to create unfair advantages. And there are issues around supply chain resilience, economic security, and these are all issues that need to be better addressed if we want to be able to continue to rely on well-functioning global markets to drive continued growth and increases in incomes and living standards and opportunities in countries around the world. I guess what we say as an organization at the OECD is that it's important to reform international trading arrangements, to make them fairer and function better in a way that preserves the economic benefits of open markets and rules-based trade. And it's important for countries to engage with each other bilaterally and multilaterally, including through organizations like the OECD, on how that is best done. And of course, we are working closely as an organization with Japan in particular around boosting economic security and supply chain resilience around some of the key product lines, key strategic product lines, including critical raw materials. Now, I think I of course warmly welcome the fact that President Trump is visiting China and engaging in a bilateral meeting at the highest level with President Xi Jinping. I think the dialogue is always important as part of broader efforts to make sure that we can have a rules-based system in the best possible shape, and that any issues in the way arrangements are currently operating can be addressed through dialogue. And that is the core business of the OECD as a platform bringing countries together, focusing on the data, focusing on evidence-based analysis, and facilitating conversations to define the best possible pathways forward. Now, there are many challenges to the global growth outlook, and there are challenges for individual national economies looking ahead. But when you reflect on the last 6 or 7 years, it's been remarkable how resilient the global economy has actually been through COVID, through the energy price shock in the wake of the war, Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine, in the wake of some of the trade policy uncertainty throughout 2025 and continuing. And at the end of 25, early 26, at the OECD, we were about to upgrade our global growth outlook. And then, of course, the conflict in the Middle East flared up in the way it has, and that's now really testing some of that resilience in terms of the global economic outlook. But in summary, I think we need reform of rules-based trading arrangements, international trading arrangements, and in that context, the dialogue between President Trump and President Xi Jinping is an important part of that, and conversations that we're having at the OECD, including at our Ministerial Council meeting coming up in early June, will be an important part of that. It's going to be important to boost supply chain resilience, to boost economic security, and to tackle unfair market distorting trade practices and to continue our efforts to level the playing field.
じゃああと30秒ぐらいになりましたけど、じゃあ
We have 30 seconds left. Last question, please.
Takuya Nishimura, individual member of this club. My question goes to Secretary General Cormann. And Prime Minister Takaichi has announced her intention not to have a supplementary budget, which seems to be compatible with the recommendation of OECD. However, the supplemental budget has been one of the measures for maintaining stable growth of Japanese economy. So do you think Japan can maintain its stable growth without a supplemental budget? Do you have any specific plan with that? Or did you have any conversation with her, Takaichi, yesterday? Thank you very much.
Well, so, I mean, yes, I did have a conversation with the Prime Minister yesterday. It was a very good conversation, and it was very much focused on OECD support for the Prime Minister's growth strategy and also focused on our Japan-OECD cooperation plan on economic security. We didn't specifically talk about the budgeting cycle. But let me say that, you know, we very much welcome the shift to multi-year budgeting. I mean, we think that the use of supplementary budgets had become too regular in Japan. I mean, in fact, I think the Prime Minister's commitment to multi-year budgeting does address one of our core structural fiscal recommendations, which we welcome. I mean, when we look back, I mean, supplementary budgets in Japan have been used, effectively every year since 2000, and since 2019 they have averaged significantly above pre-pandemic norms. Making budget ceilings non-binding, and that, of course, undermines medium-term planning. So restricting them to clearly defined extraordinary shocks with ex-post review, we do think will substantially improve fiscal discipline and enhance credibility. And multi-year budgeting for economic security and growth investments actually will help drive stronger growth. Investment certainty will reduce the risk premium for private co-investors, and it also helps to improve horizons for firms. So, I think multi-year budgeting really signals a commitment to a more orderly fiscal process, which I think ultimately over the medium to long run is going to be better for growth. I don't think you can use I don't think it is good practice to use supplementary budgets as an ad hoc, regular, systematic fix to try and achieve growth objectives. I think that the way the Prime Minister has signaled she wishes to proceed is better. Thank you.
Can I? No. I'm very sorry. Nishimura-san? I'm sorry. So, 大変まだ質問があって大変。
I'm sure there are more questions, but he has spent more time than he allowed us to have the press conference. Secretary General Cormann, thank you very much for your valuable time.